I still remember the smell of disinfectant that day. Sharp, cold, sterile. It clung to my hands long after I signed her discharge papers. She was lying there, pale under the hospital lights, pretending to be fragile, pretending to die. She wanted proof of love, a desperate, dangerous test born from doubt. "Would you still stay?" she whispered, "if I couldn't walk again?" I said yes, of course. But promises sound softer than silence. Weeks turned into months of hospital visits. I skipped work, sold my motorcycle, moved closer to the ward. She watched me break, and I thought that was love. Devotion, proven through exhaustion. Until the doctor slipped, calling her file the simulation case. My hands trembled as truth replaced sympathy. She wasn't dying, she was observing me, measuring how long I'd stay before I gave up. So I did what she never expected. I signed her discharge papers myself, walked out before her test could end in my ruin. Now she sends messages I never open. Sometimes I imagine her face when she woke up to find me gone. Maybe she realized that love doesn't survive lies, not even beautiful ones. And maybe, just maybe, she finally felt what it's like to lose something real. It began with a cough. Just a soft one. The kind that slips between words, easy to ignore, easier to excuse. She laughed it off, brushing her fingers against her lips, saying something about dust in the air. The sound of her laughter mingled with the clatter of plates and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I remember thinking how alive she looked that night, the way her hair caught the yellow light, the way her voice filled every corner of my small apartment. We were halfway through dinner when she coughed again. Harder. This time she reached for her water, eyes glistening. I asked if she was okay. She smiled, the kind of smile that told you not to worry. "It's nothing," she said. "Just my body reminding me I'm human." I laughed with her, but somewhere deep inside a shadow stirred. Small, sharp, uninvited. A week later, she was still coughing. The jokes stopped. The shadows under her eyes grew darker. At night, when she spoke, her voice carried a brittle edge like glass about to crack. "I'll go see a doctor tomorrow," she promised. "You worry too much." But she didn't go. Not that day, or the next. When I found her fainting in the bathroom, the mirror fogged with steam and her knees buckling, everything that followed felt like a dream played in reverse. Ambulance lights slicing through the night, hospital doors opening like jaws, her name being called by people in white coats who didn't know her laughter the way I did. I ran beside the stretcher, her hand limp in mine, and whispered over and over, "You'll be fine. You'll be fine." But I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. The first night at the hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear. Machines hummed softly, the rhythm steady, mechanical, heartless. I sat beside her bed, my hands clutching hers, afraid that if I let go, she'd vanish into the sterile white. When her mother arrived, her face was swollen from tears. "She's lucky to have you," she whispered to me. "You're her only comfort." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Every evening after that, I came straight from work. Sometimes I'd find her asleep, the IV drip casting thin shadows on her wrist. Sometimes she'd be awake, smiling faintly, pretending to be strong. "You make pain feel smaller," she'd say, her voice barely above a breath. And I'd answer the only way I knew how, by staying. By holding her hand even when her fingers went cold. By wiping her forehead when the fever made her tremble. By telling her stories about how we'd go to the sea again when this was over. She'd close her eyes and smile, as if the sound of waves could drown out the sound of the machines. But there were moments, small, fleeting, sharp, when something about her didn't fit the picture of sickness. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me. Not lovingly, not longingly, but curiously, like a scientist observing a subject through glass, like she was taking notes in her mind. How many hours I stayed, how I reacted when she coughed, how tired my eyes looked. Once I saw her scribbling in a small notebook when she thought I was asleep. I asked what she was writing. She laughed, hiding it under the blanket. "Letters to my future self," she said. I believed her. Weeks passed. The hospital became our world. Time blurred into a monotone of morning checkups, quiet afternoons, and restless nights. I'd bring her books, flowers, anything to make the room feel less like a cage. She'd smile at my efforts, sometimes teasing, sometimes distant. "Why do you look at me like I'm fragile?" she asked one evening. "Because you are," I said. She laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just pretending." It sounded like a joke. I didn't laugh. Her tests never came back with clear answers. The doctors used words like inconclusive and observation period. Her mother stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting answers. Love, it seemed, was supposed to fill the gaps that science couldn't. But love was never meant to replace truth. There was one night I'll never forget. The rain was falling hard outside, tapping against the window like fingers desperate to come in. The ward was dark except for the small reading lamp near her bed. She looked at me and said, "If I don't make it, promise me you won't fade." My throat tightened. "Don't talk like that." "I'm serious," she whispered. "If I disappear tomorrow, I want you to keep living. For both of us." I wanted to tell her that I couldn't imagine a world where she didn't exist, that her laughter was stitched into every corner of my memory. But instead, I just nodded. Because love, at its most helpless, often hides behind silence. She reached for my hand, her skin cool against mine. "You'll move on," she said. "You always do." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Days turned into a slow ache. Her condition never worsened, but it never improved either. Each morning, I'd find her sitting upright, staring out the window like she was waiting for something. A sign, a message, a reaction. Once, I overheard her talking to the nurse. "He hasn't missed a single day," she said softly. "Not one." The nurse chuckled. "You're lucky. Most men would have run by now." Her reply was almost a whisper. "Maybe he should." When she saw me standing at the door, she quickly changed the subject. But her eyes, they lingered, heavy with something unspoken. I started noticing things. How her hair always seemed freshly brushed, her makeup subtle but deliberate. How she sometimes laughed too perfectly as if timing her emotions. How her phone was never far from reach, the screen lighting up with notifications she'd quickly hide. Once, while adjusting her blanket, I saw a camera lens glint from behind the flower vase. A small, almost invisible one. I froze. She noticed my gaze and smiled. "Oh, that? The doctors are recording recovery footage." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe everything she said, because disbelief meant betrayal, and I wasn't ready for that. Every night I went home exhausted but unable to sleep. The sound of machines haunted my dreams. I'd wake up sweating, reaching for her hand that wasn't there. My friends said I was destroying myself, that love shouldn't feel like drowning. But I called it devotion. They called it delusion, and maybe both were true. One afternoon, I brought her a small sketchbook. "Here," I said, "something to pass the time." She flipped through the blank pages, smiling faintly. "Draw me something." I nodded and began to sketch her, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the way her eyes never stayed still for long. When I finished, she looked at it for a long time. "You made me look kinder than I am." "Maybe that's how I see you," I said. Her lips parted as if to speak, but instead she turned away. "Maybe you shouldn't," she murmured. A few days later, she asked me something that still echoes in my mind. "If I couldn't walk again, would you still love me?" I frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer." "Yes," I said. "Of course." Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for cracks. "Even if I couldn't make you laugh, even if I wasn't beautiful anymore, I don't love you for that." She smiled sadly. "Everyone says that, until they have to prove it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the question, but because of the way she asked it, as if love were a riddle with no right answer. The next morning, I arrived early. Her bed was empty. Panic shot through me. I ran to the nurse's station. "She's in the therapy room," they said. When I entered, she was walking slowly between two bars, pretending to struggle. But the therapist's clipboard was blank. No notes, no readings. Just her eyes, flicking toward me, watching. She stumbled dramatically. I rushed to catch her. Her fingers gripped my shirt tightly, and for a brief second, I felt her strength. Steady, deliberate. Then she released me, falling softly onto the mat, whispering, "You still came running." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. That evening, while she slept, I sat by her bedside, studying her face, the rise and fall of her chest, the faint smile on her lips, even in sleep. She looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone battling an unnamed illness. The rain started again outside, tapping against the window. I thought of all the times she'd asked, "Would you still love me if—" I realized I'd never asked the question back. Would she still love me if I stopped proving it every day? If I simply walked away? I didn't know. And maybe that was the real sickness between us. Not her body, but our faith. When dawn came, she opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "You stayed again," she said. "I'll always stay," I answered. She turned her face away, and for a split second I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, or maybe sorrow. "Don't make promises like that," she whispered. "They have a way of breaking you." But I was already broken. I just didn't know it yet. That morning, I kissed her forehead before leaving. The air outside was crisp, filled with the scent of wet earth. I looked up at the hospital window, her window, one last time. She was there, watching me. Our eyes met. She smiled and waved. For a moment, everything felt right again. But the glass between us said otherwise. It reflected my face back at me. Tired, hollow, hopeful. And behind the reflection, I thought I saw her writing something in that same notebook again. I couldn't read the words, but I knew they weren't letters to her future self. They were notes about me. That was the night I stopped believing her cough was just a cough. That was the night love began to taste like doubt. Still, I stayed. Because I thought that's what love meant. Devotion without question. And maybe that was my first mistake. There's a difference between love and examination. One feels like warmth, the other feels like waiting for something to go wrong. At first, I didn't notice the shift. It began subtly, in the way she phrased her questions. They stopped sounding like the fears of a sick woman and started sounding like riddles with no right answers. "If I lost my hair," she asked one morning, "would you still find me beautiful?" I was pouring soup into her bowl, watching the steam rise in quiet spirals. "Of course," I said. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't. It was a small, silent dissonance, her lips curving upward while her gaze remained fixed, studying me. Not lovingly, but curiously, like I was part of an experiment she hadn't told me about. That was the first time I felt like something invisible had entered the room, something watching both of us. A week later, she asked another. "If I couldn't walk again," she said, "would you still want me?" We were sitting by the hospital window. Outside, the sky looked like wet paper, gray and smudged with rain. I turned to her, searching her face for sincerity, for fear, for anything human. "Why would you even think that?" I asked softly. "Just answer," she insisted. "Yes," I said, "I would." She stared at me for a long time before nodding, as if ticking a mental box. It wasn't the question that hurt. It was what came after. The silence. The way she turned her face toward the window, hiding a small, satisfied smile like she'd just collected data. That night I stayed later than usual. She was asleep, or pretending to be. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the monitor. The beeping had become part of my breathing, slow and constant. I sat there, tracing the outline of her hand with my thumb. I remembered the woman she was before all this, how she used to hum while washing dishes, how she'd leave sticky notes on my desk saying things like, "Eat lunch before 3, idiot," or "Stop working late, you have me." Now her notes were gone, her laughter replaced by long, strategic silences. I wondered if love could survive without laughter. Then I noticed something. A small red light, barely visible, blinking faintly from beneath her blanket. I leaned closer. It was a tiny camera, the kind used for vlogging or surveillance. Hidden carefully, facing the bed, my chest tightened. I didn't move it, didn't ask, didn't even breathe too loudly, because confronting it felt like stepping into a trap, like she was waiting for me to react, to confirm something she already suspected. When she stirred, I leaned back into the chair, pretending to scroll through my phone. She opened her eyes slightly and smiled. "You're still here," she murmured. "Always," I whispered. Her smile deepened, not in relief, but in quiet satisfaction, like she'd just written down another result. The next day, the nurses looked at me differently. They used to greet me warmly, offering coffee or chatting about small things. The weather, the visiting hours. But lately, there was pity in their eyes, a kind of sadness mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe. One of them, a young woman named Neela, stopped me in the hallway. "You're a good one," she said quietly, her hand brushing my sleeve. I forced a small smile. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. Just take care of yourself too, okay?" I wish I'd asked again. I wish I'd looked her in the eyes and demanded to know what she wasn't saying. But I didn't, because part of me didn't want to know. Every day after that, the questions got stranger. If I told you I wasn't the same person anymore, would you still stay? If I stopped loving you, would you still fight for me? Sometimes she asked while pretending to be asleep, her voice soft and trembling. Sometimes she looked right at me, steady and unblinking, like she was daring me to flinch. Each time, I said yes. Always yes. Because that's what love meant to me. Answering without hesitation, even when you didn't understand the question. But love, I would later learn, wasn't what she was testing. She was testing my limits. One evening, she asked me to bring her mirror. Her hair had started to fall. At least, she said it had. I handed her the mirror. She stared at her reflection for a long time, then ran her fingers through her hair, pulling out a few strands dramatically. She looked at me, eyes shimmering. "Would you still think I'm beautiful? Like this?" Her voice broke perfectly, almost rehearsed. I took her hand, kissed her knuckles. "You're still the most beautiful thing in this world." Her tears fell. 1, 2, and then she looked at me again with that same quiet observation, as though she were measuring how convincingly I said it. "Good," she whispered. And for the first time, I didn't feel comfort in her tears. I felt studied. The nurses began whispering when I walked in. Once, I overheard 2 of them by the vending machine. "He's still here?" one said. "He doesn't know," the other replied. Poor guy. When they noticed me, they fell silent. I smiled politely and walked away, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. But those words stuck in my mind like glass shards. He doesn't know. Didn't know what? That night, as I sat by her bed, she asked another question. It was late. The lights were dimmed, the hallway outside empty. "If I told you I lied about something," she said softly, "would you forgive me?" I looked at her, her pale skin, her trembling lips, the fragile rise and fall of her chest. "Depends on the lie," I said. She tilted her head slightly, smiling. "You'd want to know first?" "Wouldn't you?" Her smile faded. "Maybe not." But her hand didn't let go of mine. I stayed there, my thoughts turning like storm clouds. because love built on secrets feels heavy, and I was beginning to drown. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. Every time I seemed tired or distracted, her symptoms worsened. Every time I spoke softly or held her hand longer, she seemed miraculously better. Her moods followed mine, as if she was tuning herself to my reactions. One evening, I decided to test her test. I walked in late, deliberately cold, eyes downcast. I didn't bring her favorite coffee or the tulip she liked. She frowned immediately. "Rough day." "Something like that," I said. She hesitated. "You didn't miss me." I didn't answer. For the first time, she looked nervous. Truly nervous. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "You're quieter today." I shrugged. "Maybe I'm tired." She studied me, her breathing quickening, and then, as if on cue, she winced, clutching her stomach. I feel dizzy," she said. I rushed to her side instinctively. The machines beeped in alarm. Nurses ran in, and then, just as suddenly, she smiled faintly, as if relieved. As if she'd gotten what she wanted. When the nurses left, I sat back down, my heart still pounding. "Why didn't you tell them it was just a momentary pain?" I asked. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "It wasn't. I really felt it." "Right when I stopped talking to you?" Her expression didn't change. "Maybe love is the medicine, and you were withholding it." Her words were soft, playful even, but beneath them, I heard something darker, a need to control, a fear to lose, a hunger for proof. That night, I couldn't bring myself to touch her hand. She noticed. "You're upset," she said. "I'm confused." "About what?" "About whether you want love or obedience." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked away. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. The light flickered once, twice. For a moment, her face was illuminated. And I saw it. The faintest smirk, quickly hidden. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The next morning, she acted sweet again, like nothing had happened. She laughed, asked for her favorite music, even teased me about my wrinkled shirt. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, the way she watched me between laughs, the small pauses where she waited to see how I'd react. She wasn't living her life anymore. She was scripting mine. Later that day, Nurse Nila found me in the corridor again. "You should rest," she said quietly. "I'm fine." Her eyes darted toward the room. She's a complicated patient." "What do you mean?" "She's studying psychology," Nila whispered. Before she got admitted, she was doing her thesis on emotional fidelity. My blood turned to ice. Emotional fidelity? She nodded, lowering her voice. How far people go to prove love when placed under stress or deception. I stared at her, my mind spinning. "You're saying this? All of this?" Neela's eyes filled with guilt. "I'm not saying anything. Just be careful." When I returned to the room, she was writing in her notebook again. I stood at the door, watching her. She looked up, startled, then smiled too quickly. "You scared me." "What are you writing?" "Just thoughts." "About me?" Her pen froze mid-air. "Why would you think that?" she asked, laughing softly. "Because that's what it feels like," I said. "Like every word I say, every breath I take is being recorded somewhere." Her smile faltered. "You're imagining things." I walked closer, pointing at the small red light still blinking beneath her blanket. "Am I?" For a second, panic flickered in her eyes. Then she regained composure, her voice soft and calculated. "It's for therapy," she said, "to document my recovery." I didn't reply, because deep down, I already knew this wasn't recovery. It was research, and I was the subject. That night, I didn't stay. I told her I had work early. She nodded, too calmly. When I reached the exit, I turned around once. Through the glass, I saw her still, pen in hand, writing again, her face lit by the cold glow of the monitor. And as the rain began to fall outside, one thought cut through the noise in my head. She wasn't testing love anymore. She was testing how much pain I could take before I stopped calling it love. It started with distance. Not the kind that measures in meters or steps, but in heartbeats that no longer sync. She began to drift. Her body was still there, pale against the hospital sheets, but her soul seemed to live somewhere I couldn't reach anymore, somewhere colder. Even her laughter, once soft and messy, now sounded rehearsed, like a melody she'd forgotten the meaning of. She stopped holding my hand first. She let mine linger, her fingers limp beneath mine, a courtesy more than connection. I told myself it was the medication, the fatigue, the pain, but deep down, something darker whispered, "She's slipping away by choice." One afternoon, sunlight spilled across her bed in warm, golden streaks. I had brought her soup, homemade, her favorite, still steaming. The smell filled the sterile air, trying to chase away the scent of antiseptic and loneliness. She didn't look at it. Her eyes were glued to her phone, screen dim but her expression sharp. I asked softly, "Who are you texting?" She didn't flinch. "Just someone who remembers what it's like to live." Her words cut deeper than she probably intended. Or maybe she did intend it. I couldn't tell anymore. That night, she compared me to him. The man who brought flowers every day. Bright tulips, lilies, roses, as if he were trying to bury her in color. "He's funny," she said. "He doesn't look at me like I'm fragile." Then she looked at me with a smirk I hadn't seen before. "You do." I wanted to tell her that loving someone sick doesn't make them fragile. It makes you fragile. Because every smile feels borrowed from time. But I didn't say that. I just nodded, pretending to understand, pretending that my heart wasn't cracking open. The comparisons became routine. "The doctor said I look better in blue. You never notice things like that." My ex used to read to me when I couldn't eat, sleep. "You just sit there." He said I still have a spark. Do you see it? Each sentence felt like a quiet verdict, a death by emotional cuts. I wanted to scream, to ask why she needed to hurt me to feel alive. But instead, I cleaned her dishes, adjusted her pillows, bought her favorite magazine. Because that's what devotion looked like in my head. Service without complaint. One night, she asked the question that broke me. "If you were sick," she whispered, "do you think I'd stay?" The world stopped. Even the heart monitor seemed to pause, waiting for my answer. I didn't have one. She smiled faintly at my silence, like she'd expected it, like it confirmed something cruel she already believed. After that, her voice changed. Her tone when speaking to me carried an edge, sharp, playful, dangerous. She'd test me, word by word. "Would you still love me if I forgot your name? Would you still visit if I screamed at you? Would you still hold me if I lied?" Each time, I said yes, but my yeses began to sound like begging. I was loving her on borrowed faith, while she tested how far that love could stretch before it broke. And still, I stayed. I stayed through the cold silences, through the pitying glances of nurses, through the ache that came from realizing I was loving a memory, not a person who loved me back. There was a night, one I'll never forget. Rain fell against the window, slow and steady, like the earth was weeping with me. I had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, my hand loosely holding hers. When I woke, she was awake too, but she wasn't looking at me. She was on a video call. Her voice was soft, affectionate, different. I didn't hear the words clearly, but I saw her face, the way her lips curved, the way her eyes softened. It wasn't a patient talking to a friend. It was a lover talking to someone who made her heart feel alive. I froze. Every instinct told me to walk away. to leave before she saw me broken. But I couldn't. I was addicted to pain that wore her face. When the call ended, she noticed me. Her expression didn't shift. No guilt, no surprise, just calm acceptance. "You shouldn't eavesdrop," she said. "I didn't mean to." My voice cracked. "Who was that?" She looked me dead in the eye. "Someone who doesn't make me feel trapped." I wanted to shout, "Trapped?" I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed until dawn, the jobs I skipped, the dreams I paused, the love I poured like oxygen into her dying faith. But I didn't, because somehow I knew. None of it mattered anymore. Days passed, but the silence grew louder. Her room became a stage where I played the fool, the devoted man performing love for an audience of one who no longer clapped. The nurses avoided my eyes now. I caught one whispering near the door, voice low, "Poor guy. He still doesn't know." Didn't know what? The thought haunted me. Every word, every look, every sigh she gave felt like part of a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. One morning, she asked me to leave early. "I need rest," she said. "You being here makes it harder." Harder? I stood there, clutching the bouquet I'd brought. White tulips this time, her favorite once upon a time. She didn't even glance at them. Something inside me cracked quietly, the kind of sound only the soul hears. I walked out, each step echoing with disbelief. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was a strange, colorless gray. I stood under the hospital awning for a long time, just staring at the puddles. My reflection looked like a stranger's, eyes hollow, mouth trembling, heart begging for a reason to stay. But I still went back the next day, because love in its cruelest form isn't about logic, it's about habit. Then came the moment that sealed everything. A nurse I'd seen often, gentle, quiet, always with a sad smile, pulled me aside. "She's been filming you," she said softly, "for weeks. I thought you knew." My breath hitched. "Filming me?" She nodded. She said it's for a documentary about how love behaves under pressure. She wanted raw reactions. Her words blurred. My mind went blank. I remembered the camera under her blanket, the way she'd ask impossible questions with that cold curiosity in her eyes, the way she watched me, not like a lover, but like a scientist studying a subject. I thanked the nurse. I don't even remember how. I just walked away, numb, air heavy in my lungs. When I entered the room, she was sitting up, scrolling through her phone. "You filmed me," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. I had to know if love was real. By deceiving it. By testing it, she said, calm as ever. "If it's real, it should survive the worst, right?" I laughed, a broken, bitter sound that startled even me. "Then, congratulations," I said. "You found the limit." Her eyes flickered just for a second, a trace of something that almost looked like regret. But it vanished as fast as it came. That night, I sat alone in the hospital parking lot. The rain had returned, tracing streaks across my windshield like tears from the sky. I thought about every moment. The way she smiled through pain, the way I believed every lie, the way I mistook her cruelty for coping. I realized then, I wasn't her lover. I was her experiment. And maybe in some twisted way, she needed me to fail. Because if love couldn't survive her test, then she could finally believe it never existed at all. When I went back the next morning, her bed was empty. A nurse handed me her discharge papers. "She checked out early," she said. "Signed them herself." My heart dropped. On the papers at the bottom corner was my signature, forged. Beside it, a single line written in her handwriting. "You passed, but I'm done testing." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Outside, sunlight spilled across the window again, the same golden light that once touched her hair, her smile, our false comfort. I thought of everything. Her laugh, her coldness, the way she turned love into an equation she could control. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt empty, because I realized love isn't something you prove. It's something you either give freely or you destroy trying. She chose the latter. And I walked out of that hospital with a quiet heart and rain still clinging to my shoes, leaving behind the woman who taught me the most painful truth of all. Sometimes, love dies not when someone leaves you, but when they decide you were just an experiment worth ending. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that feels suspended between two storms, one outside, one within. Rain lashed against the hospital window in steady rhythms, as if the sky itself was breathing in grief. The world was gray, colorless, stripped of warmth. The ward lights flickered faintly, and the air carried that cold scent of sterilized despair. I'd been there since dawn, watching her sleep. Or pretend to. I wasn't sure anymore. Her face was peaceful, almost too peaceful, like an actress between takes. I remember brushing her hair away from her forehead, the way one does for someone fragile. Her skin was warm under my touch, too warm for someone fighting an illness. But I ignored it, because love, I had learned, is sometimes just the art of making excuses for the person who hurts you. Around noon, a young intern came by, new, nervous, carrying a stack of files. She looked barely out of college, her ID card swinging as she rushed to the nurse's desk. "Room 512, right?" she muttered, flipping through the papers. Without looking, she handed one to me. "Sir, can you please confirm Miss Rahman's condition for the attending physician?" Her tone was rushed, distracted. I frowned. "I'm not a doctor. I'm her—" But she was already gone, disappearing into the hallway with wet footprints and urgency. The file was still in my hands. It had her name on it. Miss Seema Rahman, in neat hospital print, and beneath it the words that shouldn't have existed. Simulation case, behavioral study, section B. Objective: observe emotional endurance and partner loyalty under false diagnosis conditions. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and nausea. For a long moment, I didn't move. The rain outside kept falling, louder now, as if every drop was echoing inside my chest. I opened the file with trembling fingers. Inside were printed sheets, notes scribbled in blue ink, dates, timelines, emotional observations. Subject exhibits strong devotion. Subject denies reality of illness, clings to belief in emotional cure. Crying frequency increasing as partner's symptoms worsen. Possible attachment trauma, recommends post-study therapy. Each line burned through me like acid. Every moment I thought was real. Her tears, her laughter through pain, her trembling voice whispering, "You make pain feel smaller," had been part of an experiment. I flipped further. There were photos, still frames from the hospital room camera. Me sitting beside her. Me holding her hand. Me asleep in the chair. Exhaustion written all over my face, and below one image, a comment in her handwriting. "He doesn't break easily." That was when my knees gave out. The sound of the rain blurred with my heartbeat. I sat there on the cold tile floor, file open in front of me, my hands shaking. It wasn't anger I felt at first. It was emptiness, like someone had quietly stolen the floor beneath my feet. I tried to remember every moment again, to separate truth from lie. But it was impossible. Her fainting at dinner, the panic, the endless hospital nights, the whispers from nurses who looked at me with pity, all of it orchestrated, all of it fake. She hadn't been dying, but I had, dying slowly from faith. At some point I stood. My legs felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. The file was still in my hand, its weight unbearable. When I entered her room again, she was awake, propped against her pillows, scrolling through her phone with that detached calmness she'd perfected. She looked up at me. "You're early." I didn't answer. I just walked in, placed the file on her lap, and stepped back. Her brows furrowed slightly. "What's this?" I didn't say a word. She flipped it open. For a second, nothing happened. Then I saw it. The shift. Her lips parted. The color drained from her face. Her fingers froze mid-page. Her eyes darted up to me. Wide, defenseless human for the first time in months. "Where did you—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was calm. Too calm. I took a slow breath. The air tasted metallic, like rust and betrayal. "You were never sick." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "You weren't dying," I continued. "You were testing. Every tear, every word, every night I spent here thinking I'd lose you, all of it was your game." Her silence was louder than thunder. She looked down, her eyes trembling. "It wasn't meant to go this far." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "This far? You made me believe you were dying, Saima. You made me watch you suffer." Her voice cracked. "I needed to know if love like that existed. If you'd stay when everything fell apart." "And what did you find?" I asked softly. "Did you get your data?" Her eyes met mine, wet now, uncertain. "You stayed." "For the wrong reasons," I said. "I stayed because I believed in something you were pretending to feel." She reached for me then. Slow. Desperate. But I stepped back. "You made me think love was medicine," I whispered. "You made me think I could save you." The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the glass like fists. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "But you did," I replied. "You hurt the part of me that believed people don't use love as a weapon." Her lips trembled. "I just wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "If love could survive lies." I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't the woman I loved anymore. She was the ghost of her own experiment, hollowed out by her own design. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You know," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain, "the irony is, you were never sick, but now I'm the one who'll need recovery." I left the file on her pillow. Open, pages fluttering under the soft hiss of air conditioning. The room smelled of disinfectant and regret. When I walked out, I didn't look back. But as I passed the nurse's station, I heard someone say, "He found out." Another voice whispered, "She never meant it to end this way." I kept walking. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The hospital courtyard shimmered under the dim streetlights, reflections broken by ripples in the puddles. I stood there for a long time, the air thick with the scent of wet soil and loss. In the glass door behind me, I could see my reflection. Pale, drained, older. The man who had walked into that hospital months ago was gone. The man standing now was someone else. Someone who had loved too deeply, trusted too blindly, and been dissected for it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the way she looked when she realized I knew. Not with guilt, but with a kind of sorrow reserved for people who destroy something they didn't mean to. On the table beside me lay her last message, the one she sent before I stopped answering. "I'm sorry if I broke something real. I didn't know how else to find it." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Because some apologies don't belong in the same world as forgiveness. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Her room was empty. The bed stripped bare, the sheets folded, the machines gone. A nurse walked by and paused. "You're looking for Miss Rahman." I nodded. "She was discharged last night," she said softly. "Left this for you." She handed me an envelope. My name written on it, in her handwriting. Neat, deliberate, like always. I didn't open it right away. I went outside, to the same bench where I'd sat through so many rainstorms waiting for visiting hours. The sky was clearing. Pale sunlight spilled through the clouds, timid but honest. I tore open the envelope. Inside, one line. "You passed." But I failed. That was all. No explanation, no defense, no plea. Just those 6 words, enough to both wound and heal. I folded the note, placed it in my pocket, and looked up at the sky. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that forgives, but the kind that accepts. Because maybe love wasn't meant to be tested like that. Maybe it wasn't something you measured in pain or loyalty or sacrifice. Maybe it was just a choice, one she never made, and one I finally did. As I walked away from the hospital, the sound of the rain began again, softer now, like the world was whispering closure. And I realized something simple, almost poetic. She faked her illness to test my love. But in the end, it was her love that failed the test, and the only discharge signed that day was mine. Morning came in shades of pale blue and apology. The rain had stopped, leaving streaks of water across the hospital windows like fingerprints of last night's sorrow. Somewhere, a machine beeped its final rhythm, a sound that used to terrify me. Now, it just echoed hollow in the corners of my chest. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd spent the night sitting in the corridor outside her room, the thin plastic chair biting into my spine, watching the slow rise of dawn. The air smelled of antiseptic and something more, something human and fading. Inside, I could hear her breathing through the half-open door. Steady, peaceful, not sick, not dying, just pretending. And yet, the sight of her, curled under the blanket, hair fanned across the pillow, lips parted slightly in sleep, still twisted something in me. A reflex of tenderness, the body remembering love even when the heart has let it die. I stood. My knees ached. My heart didn't. When I walked toward the administration desk, I carried her file under my arm. The words "simulation case" still stared at me from the front page like a brand I could never wash off. The clerk looked up, startled. "Can I help you, sir?" Her name tag read Mina, and she spoke softly, as if afraid the air might shatter. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. "I'd like to discharge a patient." She blinked. "Name?" "Saima Rahman." There was a pause. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. I'll need authorization from her attending physician." "She's cleared," I said flatly, placing the folder on the desk. "You can check the notes yourself." Mina opened the file, scanning through the pages with cautious eyes. She frowned, confused by what she read. The psychological evaluation, the clinical staging, the ethics disclaimer. Her lips parted slightly, as though she'd stumbled into something she shouldn't have seen. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded once. "Completely." When I took the pen from her to sign the discharge papers, my hand didn't shake. Not while I wrote her name. Not while I initialed beside the release date. Not even while I drew the final line across the signature field. Not while I wrote her name. Not while I initialed beside the release date. Not even while I drew the final line across the signature field. It was only afterward, when I put the pen down, that the tremor came. Small at first, then violent, like my fingers were remembering everything my heart wanted to forget. Mina handed me the completed papers. I thanked her quietly, the words scraping my throat raw. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass of the hallway door, unshaven, eyes red, rimmed with sleeplessness, a man who had spent too long loving a performance. For a second, I thought I saw her standing behind me in the reflection, her pale silhouette framed by the hospital light. But when I turned, there was only the corridor stretching empty and cold. The walk to her room felt longer than any I'd ever taken. The linoleum floor gleamed, wet from recent mopping, and the smell of disinfectant was almost suffocating. Every step echoed. Every breath carried a weight that no one else could see. Her door was half closed, a sliver of warm light cutting through the sterile white. She was sitting up when I entered. Her hair was brushed, her face clean, as if she had prepared herself for a scene. Always prepared. Always aware of how she looked in the story she was directing. "You didn't come in last night," she said softly. I know. She studied me. You look tired. I am. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she smiled, a soft, practiced smile. The doctor said I might be able to go home soon. I placed the folder on the side table. You already can. Her smile froze. What? I signed the discharge papers. Her eyes widened. You what? You're free to leave, Saima. She laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound. You're joking. I didn't answer. Her gaze darted to the folder, then back to me. You had no right to end the lie? I said quietly. No right to stop being your experiment? The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then her shoulders slumped and the mask slipped. You found out. I did. Silence, the kind that cracks open the ribs. She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But there was a hollowness in her tone, the kind of remorse that belonged more to actors after a bad scene than to lovers after a betrayal. You made me believe you were dying, I said. You made everyone believe it. It was part of the therapy, she said, eyes glistening. A study about emotional dependency. I was the control variable? Her lips trembled. No, you were the only one who stayed. I almost laughed at that. Stayed. Yes, I had stayed. Through her fevers, her trembling hands, her whispered fears at 2 a.m. All rehearsed lines. I had memorized them like scripture, answered them with devotion. And now, all of it, every kiss on her forehead, every prayer whispered into the hum of machines, had become nothing more than data points in someone's cruel psychology experiment. I didn't want to hurt you, she said weakly, but you did. The air between us felt sharp, cutting through every word. I thought, she continued, voice cracking, if someone could love me even when I was dying, then maybe it would mean something. Maybe it would feel real. And did it? I asked. She didn't answer. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but they looked rehearsed too. Too symmetrical, too cinematic. I picked up the folder and handed it to her. You don't need this anymore. Her fingers brushed mine, cold, trembling, desperate. Wait, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I took a step back. Then how was it supposed to end, Saima? With applause. She flinched as if I'd struck her. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Machines beeped quietly in the background, indifferent witnesses to the collapse of everything I'd believed in. I loved you, I said, and it hurt to realize how true that still was. Even when it wasn't real, even when you were performing. She closed her eyes, tears spilling freely now. I know. For a heartbeat, I almost reached for her. My body still remembered the instinct. To comfort, to hold, to protect. But love built on lies is a ghost that never leaves. It only learns to haunt more quietly. I turned toward the door. Please, she said again, her voice breaking. Don't go. Not yet. I paused, my hand on the handle. The rain had started again outside, soft and steady, as if the sky was mourning something neither of us could name. I already did, I whispered. Then I walked out. The corridor was cold, the lights too bright. Every nurse, every patient I passed seemed like a stranger in a play I no longer wanted to watch. By the time I reached the front desk, Mina was gone. In her place, a younger clerk was arranging forms, humming faintly to herself. I left the discharge confirmation there without a word. The sliding doors opened with a hiss, and suddenly the world felt vast again. The rain kissed my face, cool and cleansing, as though the sky itself was washing away what remained of her from my skin. The first breath of outside air cut through me. It wasn't gentle, it was real, and that was what hurt most. Because for months, my entire world had been constructed inside 4 white walls. under the hum of machines and the shadow of false illness. It had felt safer to live in her fiction than to face the blank, unpredictable script of reality. But love doesn't wait for actors to drop their lines. It dissolves quietly when the curtain falls. I looked back once. Through the rain, the hospital windows blurred into a smear of yellow light. Somewhere behind one of them, she was still there, maybe crying, maybe rewriting her next scene. And me? I was just the character who walked off stage too early. When I reached the parking lot, I found her old scarf on the passenger seat of my car, faded blue, the one she used to wrap around her neck whenever she said she felt cold. I picked it up, fingers tracing the frayed edges, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to it, a ghost of warmth. For a moment, I thought about turning back, just to say one last goodbye. But what was there left to say? That I forgave her? That I didn't? That part of me still loved the version of her that never existed? The rain thickened, drumming against the windshield in erratic rhythm, like a heart trying to restart itself. I started the engine. The wipers swayed back and forth, clearing the glass, but not the ache. As I drove away, the hospital grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a white tomb of make-believe. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I realized something cruelly beautiful. She had cured me, after all, not of sickness, but of illusion. That night, I didn't go home. I drove until the city disappeared, until the road became nothing but a ribbon of wet asphalt vanishing into mist. At a rest stop by the sea, I parked and stepped out. The ocean was gray, restless, and endless. Waves crashed like applause, fading into silence. I took her scarf from the seat, held it one last time, and let the wind take it. It fluttered upward, blue against the storm, before disappearing into the horizon. I stood there, rain running down my face, salt on my lips, and whispered, "Goodbye." It wasn't poetic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was mine. For the first time in months, the air felt painfully, beautifully real. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, like fog rolling over a city that once burned with sound. Days became weeks before I realized what had truly ended. Not her lies, not my anger, but the need to fill the space she'd left behind. Her name still flashed on my phone, first daily, then hourly, then less. At first, I stared at each message, her words blooming across the screen like ghosts that didn't know they were dead. "Can we talk? You don't understand why I did it. Please, just one last time." I didn't answer, not once. Her voice messages piled up too. The sound of her crying, whispering, breaking, but I had learned something about sound by then. It's only powerful when you let it in. So I didn't. I deleted the messages unread, one by one. Each deletion felt like a funeral. Not for her, but for the version of myself that once waited on every word she said. Her mother called next. "Son," she said softly, her voice thin over the line, "she's not well. She doesn't eat. She just sits by the window. Keeps saying your name." I closed my eyes. For a second, I was back in that white hospital room, hearing the rhythmic hum of machines, watching her pretend to fade. "She'll recover," I said. "She always does." Her mother hesitated. "She made a mistake, but she loves you." "Love doesn't need an audience," I replied quietly. And before she could answer, I ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavier than guilt, because it wasn't cruel. It was calm. Final. The letters came next. Thick, white envelopes, her handwriting dancing across them. Soft loops, careful curves, the same way she used to trace her fingers on my palm when words weren't enough. I didn't open them at first. I kept stacking them on my desk, neat, untouched. They began to form a small tower of white on the corner of my table, like a monument to everything that went wrong. But one night, maybe out of weakness or curiosity, I opened one. The first line stopped me cold. "I miss you like an illness I can't cure." The ink had bled slightly from what looked like a teardrop. I imagined her crying as she wrote it, and for a brief, traitorous moment, I almost forgave her. But as I read on, her words turned into apologies that weren't really apologies. You misunderstood me. It was never a game. You were part of something bigger. I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then into silence. After that, I stopped opening them altogether. They kept coming, weekly, then monthly, until one day they didn't. And that absence felt louder than all her words combined. At night, the silence had its own rhythm. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening. Not for her voice, not for my phone, but for the ghosts of the machines that had once surrounded her. Beep, beep, beep. The phantom sound of her false sickness lived inside my skull. Sometimes I thought it was my heart echoing the same frequency, broken but consistent. In those moments, I'd sit up, press my palms against my chest, and whisper to no one, "You're alive," not as comfort, but as proof. Because for months, I hadn't been. I started painting again. Before her, art had been my silence, a way to speak what I couldn't say out loud. But after her, every canvas turned into a battlefield. Still, I tried. The first thing I painted was a hospital window. Rain streaking down glass, sunlight breaking through faintly. Inside the window, a silhouette sat with her back turned. You couldn't see her face. That was the point. The second painting was smaller. 2 coffee cups left unfinished, one slightly cracked, the other still full. I didn't sign that one. Some ghosts don't deserve a name. Time didn't heal. It blurred. Days lost their sharp edges. Seasons shifted quietly. I began to notice small things again. The way morning light curved through curtains, the way cold wind touched skin, the way silence could be heavy but not cruel. Love had once filled every empty space in me. Now silence did, and somehow it fit better. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls, stopped expecting her name to appear. And the strangest thing happened. The world didn't collapse. It just went on. One afternoon, I found myself near the hospital. Not by choice, just by direction. The city had changed. New cafes, new roads, the same indifferent sky, but the building stood there exactly as it had before. White, tall, quiet. For a long moment, I just stared. Then I saw her mother, stepping out of the entrance holding a small potted plant. She looked older, tired. Our eyes met briefly. Recognition flashed, then hesitation. She gave me a sad, understanding smile. "She doesn't come here anymore," she said softly, as if she'd read my thoughts. "I know." "She's trying," her mother continued. "Therapy, new friends. But she says nothing feels real since you left." I looked away at the cracks in the pavement. "That's because she built her world out of lies." "She was scared," her mother whispered, "of being unloved." "Aren't we all?" I said quietly. She nodded. "Maybe, but most of us don't test love until it breaks." And then she walked past me, her footsteps echoing down the street. Soft, final, like the closing of a book. That night I sat by my window with a cup of coffee gone cold. Rain tapped softly against the glass, gentle, rhythmic. The city outside glowed under wet neon, reflections trembling on the pavement. In the distance, a siren wailed, faint, then gone. And in that fragile stillness I thought of her, not with anger, not even with love, just memory, the way she'd laugh before coughing, the way her eyes used to flicker between warmth and calculation, the way she'd say, "You make pain feel smaller." Maybe she believed it. Maybe she didn't. But I had, and that was enough to ruin me for a while. Now, sitting in silence, I realized something that hurt more than any betrayal. I didn't hate her, because to hate her meant she still owned space in my heart, and I had finally taken that back. I burned the letters the next morning, every single one of them. They curled and blackened in the sink, the flames whispering through her words like wind through old curtains. When the smoke rose, it carried a scent of old perfume and regret. I opened the window, letting the ashes drift out into the cold air. Tiny black snowflakes disappearing into light. It felt clean. Days blurred again. Work, sleep, silence. Repeat. Sometimes I'd wake at night and reach instinctively for my phone, then stop halfway, realizing there was no one left to call. And yet, that emptiness didn't sting. It just existed. Like a healed scar that still remembers pain but no longer hurts. People talk about closure like it's a letter you receive in the mail. It's not. It's silence that doesn't ache anymore. A month later, a new letter arrived. Different handwriting. Her mother's. "She's leaving the country," it read. "She wanted me to tell you. Thank you for teaching her what love is and what it is not." I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside my drawer. I didn't burn this one, because some goodbyes don't deserve fire. They deserve peace. That night I dreamed of the hospital again, but this time the machines were quiet. The bed was empty. Through the open window, sunlight poured in, gold and soft, and for the first time, she wasn't there. I woke with tears on my face, but I was smiling. The silence had changed. It no longer followed me like a shadow. It walked beside me, patient, unjudging, alive. Weeks later, I took a train to the coast, the same place where I'd let her scarf fly into the wind months ago. The sea was calm now, pale blue under an early sunrise. I stood there for a long time, breathing in salt and morning air, feeling the stillness seep into me. A child nearby laughed, chasing waves. Someone else took a photo. Life, everywhere, moving forward. And me. Finally, part of it again. I closed my eyes. The sound of the sea filled the silence, soft and infinite. Love doesn't end with noise. It ends with silence. But sometimes that silence becomes the beginning of peace. 3 months. That is how long it took for silence to become routine, for absence to stop feeling like an open wound and start feeling like the weather. Always there, unnoticed until it rains. In that span of time, I'd learned to breathe without her name caught in my throat. I'd learned to fill the hours with color instead of her voice. I painted. Day after day, night after night, I painted until my hands blistered and the studio smelled of turpentine and something that almost resembled healing. Each stroke was both confession and denial, a way to remember and erase all at once. When I finally agreed to host an exhibition, my curator said it was a celebration of resilience. But I knew better. It was a funeral, a quiet one. The gallery was small, a converted warehouse with whitewashed walls and high ceilings that caught the afternoon light like glass lungs. The guests drifted between canvases with murmurs and champagne, their words floating like dust motes through the air. Every painting in that room was a ghost. Each one whispered her name in a different shade. The window, where a figure stared through raindrops that looked suspiciously like tears. Rehearsal, where a woman's face was half lit, half shadow, caught between truth and performance. And finally, the discharge. That last one hung at the far end of the room. A man walking away from a hospital under a drizzle of gray-blue rain. His hands were empty, but the shadow behind him looked like someone still reaching out. I hadn't planned on naming it that. The title came to me the night I signed her discharge papers. The same night I realized some goodbyes don't need doors slamming or promises breaking. Sometimes they just need a pen. I was talking to a guest, or pretending to, when I felt it. That flicker, that gravitational shift in the air that only one person could cause. I turned before I could stop myself. There she was, Layla. She looked almost unreal under the gallery lights. Her hair was shorter, darker, as if she'd tried to shed the version of herself that had betrayed me. But her eyes, they were the same. Wide, trembling, full of the things we never said. For a moment, everything inside me went still. It's strange how memory can rewrite time. How 3 months can collapse into a single heartbeat when the ghost you painted walks back into your frame. She didn't approach right away. She walked slowly, weaving through the crowd until she reached it. The painting. The discharge. I watched her from a distance, unseen, her reflection trembling slightly against the glass of the frame. She stood there for what felt like forever, fingers hovering just short of the surface as if she could touch what was already gone. Then she whispered, barely audible, "You painted me." Her voice cracked on the last word. I took a breath, one of those shallow, rehearsed breaths you take before a scene you never wanted to act in again, and walked up behind her. "No," I said quietly. "I painted what you did." The words fell between us like a dropped brush, soft, final, and irreversible. She turned. Her eyes glimmered, reflecting not just me, but the entire room. The crowd, the light, the art, everything she had never been able to understand. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "I thought you thought I'd forgive?" I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The calmness hurt more. "No, Layla. You thought silence was forgiveness. You mistook my quiet for surrender." Around us, people moved, laughed, took photos, clinked glasses. Life went on, as it always does when two people's world ends quietly in the corner of a crowded room. She bit her lip, looking down. "You won't even listen." "I did," I said. "For weeks. To your calls, your letters, your texts. I listened to every word you never said out loud. And I answered. With silence." Her eyes filled. "Do you hate me?" I almost smiled. Not cruelly, just tiredly. "No. Hatred needs energy. I used mine to paint." There was a long pause then. The kind that stretches thin between two people who used to finish each other U.S. sentences. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't, because in that moment she looked exactly as she had that last day, standing in the hospital corridor calling after me while the rain blurred her outline. Except now there was no rain to hide behind. No uniform, no pretense, no reason to stay. Just her, stripped of everything but guilt. "Do you ever miss me?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I walked closer to the painting instead. The figure in it seemed to glow under the gallery lights. Lonely, almost translucent. "Sometimes," I said at last, "when I hear hospital machines in my sleep, when the smell of antiseptic catches me off guard, when I see someone waiting for a miracle they don't know has already died." She winced, and I almost hated myself for it. Almost. Then she said the words that cracked something small inside me. "I never loved him." There it was, the confession I'd once begged for. But now, it sounded like an echo in an empty hall. Late, meaningless, swallowed by distance. I turned to her, my voice quieter than a sigh. "Then why did you choose him?" Her eyes trembled. "Because he stayed when you didn't." The truth was like glass, clear, sharp, inevitable. "I was fighting for your life," I whispered. "I didn't realize I was losing mine." A tear slipped down her cheek. Not dramatic, not loud, just one drop of rain on a sunny day. Wrong, misplaced, human. She reached out then, hesitant, fingers trembling like the wings of a dying bird. "Please," she said, "let me explain." But her hand stopped halfway, because I didn't move. I couldn't. Some distances aren't measured in steps, but in choices. And I'd already made mine 3 months ago. The curator interrupted us briefly. A polite smile, a mention of guests asking for the artist. I nodded, murmured something non-committal. Layla stayed still, her body turned toward the painting as if it could shield her from the world. When the curator left, she whispered, "I thought your art was supposed to heal you." I looked at her, then at the painting again. "It did," I said, "just not in the way you think." She blinked, lost. I stopped trying to fix what was broken. I started painting the cracks instead. The lights dimmed slightly. evening settling through the glass ceiling like soft gray dust. A pianist began to play in the background, low and melancholic. The melody floated through the room like an afterthought. Layla's eyes lingered on the brushstrokes. On the way, the rain in the painting seemed to fall forever without ever touching the ground. "Was it raining that day?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but not outside." Her lips parted, but no sound came. And in that silence, I realized something. Love doesn't die the moment you stop feeling it. It dies when you finally stop explaining it. The guests began to leave. The clinking of glasses faded. The gallery grew quiet, filled only with the faint hum of air conditioning and the soft echoes of memory. Layla stood by the door, clutching her coat, uncertain. I was busy pretending to organize brushes, pretending not to notice that she hadn't moved yet. Finally, she said, "I kept your letters." I froze. "Letters?" She nodded. "The ones you never sent." That stopped me cold. "How?" "Your mother gave them to mine," she said softly. "She didn't mean to. She thought I already knew." So she had read them. The unsent confessions I'd written during her recovery, before I found out the truth. Words filled with fear and hope, and the kind of love that makes a fool out of you. My throat tightened. "You shouldn't have read them." "I had to," she said. "They were the only place you were still real." Outside, thunder murmured. The first rain in weeks began tapping against the windows. Soft, uncertain, familiar. Layla stepped closer, voice breaking. "I'm sorry, truly. If I could go back—" "You can't," I said. "None of us can." The rain thickened, streaking the glass like tears neither of us wanted to claim. For a long moment, we just stood there. Two people staring at a painting that had already decided their ending. Then I said quietly, "Love once lived in our silence. Now silence is the only thing keeping me safe." She flinched like the words had weight, then nodded, slowly, like someone signing her own discharge form. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll go." She turned toward the door, but before she stepped out, she looked back once, and for a heartbeat, I almost saw it again. The way she used to smile before life became a battlefield. The warmth before everything fractured into colors and pain. And maybe, just maybe, she saw something in me too. The version of me who still believed art could save what love couldn't. She opened the door. The rain light spilled in, silvery and sharp. When she stepped into it, she vanished. Not suddenly, not tragically, but gently, like a final brushstroke fading into the canvas. I watched until the last echo of her footsteps dissolved into the sound of rain. Then I turned off the gallery lights one by one. The room went dark, except for the discharge. The man walking away under the rain light still glowed faintly, alone, but complete. And for the first time since that day, I realized the painting was finished. As I locked the gallery door, thunder rolled again. Closer this time. The rain whispered against the glass. And though I told myself I wouldn't look back, my eyes drifted to the street. She was gone. Only the rain remained. And the faint reflection of a man who had finally learned that closure isn't something you get. It's something you paint. The day she returned to my life was overcast. The sky pressed down with the weight of clouds that looked like memory itself, thick and unyielding. I had thought months of silence had hardened me, that the echo of her absence had become a kind of armor I didn't need to take off. But when she appeared at my studio doorstep, her silhouette framed by rain-streaked glass, I realized the truth. No armor can defend against the shadow of someone who once lived inside you. She hesitated, fingers clutching the strap of her bag like it could anchor her to courage. Her eyes flicked to the canvases that leaned against the walls, some half-finished, some full of stormy colors that mirrored the nights I spent awake, replaying every lie, every calculated smile, every tear she had asked me to witness. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was fragile, barely audible above the soft hum of the air conditioning. I need to tell you something." I didn't respond. Silence had become my language. I had spent weeks learning how to let it speak in my stead. I waited for her to shape her words carefully for the moment she'd reveal herself, unguarded. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, as if summoning the strength to cross a bridge we'd burned together. I did it because I was afraid. The words fell like rain on concrete, slow and cold. I didn't move. I let them hang in the air. Afraid. The simplest human truth, and yet the most devastating when wielded as a weapon. She opened her eyes, and I saw it. The raw edges of someone who had spent so long performing pain that the real thing now scared her. "Afraid you'd stop loving me. Afraid you'd leave first," she whispered. I remember the moment my chest tightened. The irony was exquisite, cruel, poetic. Every calculation, every hidden camera, every tear that had made me bleed silently. All of it had been born from the fear of being abandoned. And yet, in acting on that fear, she had abandoned herself first, and me second. "You wanted to see how much I'd suffer for you," I said, my voice low and measured, carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every hollow heartbeat spent waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. She nodded, a single, trembling motion, the kind of nod that bends the spine in shame and remorse. Her eyes glistened, the first hint of raw emotion that wasn't manufactured. "Yes," she admitted, "I wanted to see if you'd stay, if you'd fight, if—" I cut her off with a bitter smile, one that carried the sharp tang of truth and the quiet acceptance of inevitability. "Enough to let you go," I said. The words struck her like lightning in slow motion. Her breath caught, trembled, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not the staged tears that had haunted my nights in the hospital, not the calculated glimmer of moisture that could manipulate me. These were tears unbound, spilling over the edge of control, falling freely onto a world she could no longer command. I watched in silence, my own emotions coiled like steel inside me, unyielding. I didn't reach out to wipe her tears. I didn't move toward her, because this moment, her surrender to real emotion, was not mine to claim. She sobbed quietly, shoulders shaking, lips parted in a soft, broken gasp. I could hear the faint catch of air in her throat, each one a small confession, a small surrender. And in that moment, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit fully. The love that had consumed me was no longer hers to manipulate. It had been mine to safeguard, mine to release. I turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass in slow rivers, reflecting the muted light of the city beyond. The rain had become a kind of punctuation, marking the end of sentences we never wrote, of chapters we never shared. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, and yet full of the kind of grief that could only come from understanding the cost of devotion. She stepped closer, tentative, as if the air between us were a rope she dared not tug too hard. I thought, "If I tested you, I could protect us from ending," she said, voice trembling. "I thought I could measure your love and somehow control it." I shook my head, feeling the bitter twist of reality in my chest. "You measured nothing but your fear, Layla. Love doesn't bend to tests. It doesn't wait for calculations or cameras hidden under blankets. Love is silent when it has to be, and loud when it chooses to be. Not the other way around." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for absolution, for a return to the old warmth that had once suffused our connection. But I couldn't give her that. Not anymore. Because giving it would be surrendering to a lie we had both built, brick by brick. "I understand why you did it," I said slowly, letting each word land with care. "I even understand the fear. But understanding doesn't mean forgiving. It doesn't mean staying." Her lips trembled, and she looked down, clutching the strap of her bag tighter as if holding on to something tangible could stop the unraveling of her own heart. I wanted to love you," she whispered almost inaudibly. "I know," I replied. "And that's exactly why I'm letting you go." The silence that followed was different from before. Before, silence had been armor, a defense, a way to survive. Now it was acknowledgement, recognition, a kind of mutual respect for the destruction we had wrought and the truths we could no longer deny. She raised her eyes to meet mine, tears shining like wet diamonds. I thought, if you saw me weak, if you saw me suffer, maybe you'd finally love me completely. I allowed a smile, small, bitter, unflinching. Love isn't measured by suffering, Layla. It's measured by truth, by what survives when pretense is stripped away. And what survived us was nothing but the memory of what we could have been. Her shoulders slumped. She exhaled, a long, trembling release that seemed to empty years of deceit and fear. I felt the weight of it in my chest, tight, unyielding, like a bell ringing too close to the ear. For the first time, I saw her without performance, without calculation, without cameras or tests. She was just a human being, scared and fragile, crying over mistakes she could not undo. "I wish," she began, voice breaking, "I wish I had trusted you without trying to prove anything." I looked away at the canvases that lined my studio walls. Each one bore the imprint of my anguish, my devotion, my silent rebellion against her games. I realized that the real gift of my suffering was this: I had learned to love and let go simultaneously. "You've learned," I said softly, "and that's what matters. Not the test, not the games, not the fear. Only what you do after realizing them." She swallowed, blinking rapidly to chase away the tears. I hesitated, because forgiveness is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is a recognition of truth. And you, will you ever forgive me? Sometimes it is the acknowledgement that someone will never deserve it. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I know this. I don't hate you. That's enough for now." She nodded, understanding in that delicate, trembling way that only someone stripped of pride and pretense can understand. And then, finally, she stepped back. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but quietly, as if exiting a painting she had no right to inhabit anymore. I watched her leave, her reflection mingling with the streaks of rain on the glass, and realized that the lesson of her deception had been a cruel one, but necessary. It had shown me the limits of love, the dangers of fear, and the strength of letting go. The studio felt empty after she left, but it wasn't lonely. The silence was no longer a wound. It was a canvas, waiting for the next stroke, for the next truth. I sat down at my work table, fingers brushing over the edges of a new canvas. The rain tapped against the window again, gentle, insistent, like the heartbeat of the world reminding me that life goes on, even after betrayal, even after heartbreak. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. Love doesn't require tests. Love doesn't survive manipulation. Love is not ownership, nor is it a game of endurance. Love is a quiet force, a brushstroke that leaves a mark whether you acknowledge it or not. I picked up my brush, dipped it into the wet paint, and began to draw. Slowly, deliberately, with no thought of her, with no thought of forgiveness. Just life. Just me. And as the rain streaked down the glass, mixing with the soft light of the fading afternoon, I smiled. Bitterly, yes, but also fully, finally. She had cried for the first time without pretending. I had finally seen her for what she was, and I had finally painted the last piece of our story. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, leaving tiny puddles on the studio floor. I glanced at the door, half expecting her to return, half hoping she wouldn't. And then, beneath the quiet tap of water against glass, I realized. Sometimes the most lasting love isn't the one you keep. It's the one that teaches you how to let go. Weeks had passed since that rainy afternoon in my studio, the one where she had finally cried without pretending. Life, in the meantime, had resumed its quiet rhythm. the hum of the city below my window, the soft scent of turpentine lingering in my studio, the occasional brushstroke marking a canvas that no longer carried her presence but still whispered her memory. I told myself I was healed, or at least that I was moving toward it. But the truth is, absence doesn't erase. It merely softens edges, leaving scars in softer shapes like shadows stretched across a floor in evening light. It arrived on an ordinary Wednesday, the kind of day too gray to be memorable, yet too quiet to ignore. The envelope was stark, cream-colored, heavier than a normal letter, the handwriting on it delicate but unmistakable. Her handwriting. I hesitated before touching it. My fingers lingered, hovering above the paper as if contact might pull me backward into the months of deception, tests, and betrayal I had finally let go of. But curiosity, that merciless companion, won. I took the envelope, turning it over in my hands like a fragile artifact, and slid a letter out with a careful precision that felt almost ritualistic. It wasn't long. It never had to be. You taught me that love isn't proven by pain. No apologies, no explanations, just those 6 weighted words. And yet, beneath them, I could feel everything she had never been able to say aloud. The fear, the shame, the realization of what she had destroyed in trying to measure devotion. The sentence pressed into me like a gentle hand, but one that reminded me sharply of the wound she had inflicted. I turned the letter over, hoping for something more. A signature, a flourish, a confession. Anything. There was nothing. Just the delicate curl of her handwriting, the imprint of ink pressed too softly onto paper, as if even that act required caution. Inside the envelope was another item, a hospital bracelet, the one I had held in my palm countless nights, praying silently that she would survive the illness I had once believed was real. The plastic felt fragile in my hand, lighter than memory, heavier than any gift she had ever given me. I could still feel the echo of the nights when my fingers pressed against it, when the beep of machines and the smell of antiseptic filled the air with anxiety and hope. Holding it again was like holding the ghost of a heartbeat. I set it on my desk for a moment, staring at it. I could almost hear her voice whispering in my memory. You make pain feel smaller. Only now I knew the words had been a part of the test, and I had been the one whose heart had shrunk, folded, and burned quietly in the process. The rain had begun again outside, a gentle drizzle streaking the window pane, each drop like a tiny echo of the months I had spent trapped in her games. I pressed my fingers against the bracelet, feeling the cold plastic like a tether to the past I could no longer hold. Finally, I stood. The city below blurred through the window, gray and wet and indifferent. I walked to the balcony, the envelope clutched in one hand, the bracelet in the other. The wind tugged at my coat, teasing, insistent, as if reminding me that closure required action. I opened the balcony door. The smell of wet asphalt and distant rain filled my lungs. I stepped closer to the railing, the bracelet dangling from my fingers. It glinted faintly in the muted light, a small, circular relic of something that had once felt eternal. I held it over the river below. The current churned dark and relentless, swallowing the reflections of clouds and buildings, transforming light into shadow. I hesitated, just for a moment, letting the bracelet hover above the water, imagining the months, the tests, the tears, all folding into this one final gesture. Then I let it go. It fell slowly, like a heartbeat leaving a chest it no longer belonged to. The river swallowed it without hesitation. I watched until the current carried it away, until it was gone entirely, a vanishing point in a story I had once thought I could write with her. For the first time in months, I felt the air around me settle. Not with relief, exactly, but with the quiet clarity of someone who has finally drawn a line in the sand and accepted it. She had sent her final message, and I had performed my own act of closure. Simple, unceremonious, and irrevocable. I leaned against the railing, letting the wind wash over me. The drizzle dampened my hair, the tips of my coat, and somehow it felt like baptism. Not into faith, but into freedom. Freedom from the games, from the testing, from the unrelenting shadow of someone else's fear. I thought of her one last time, not with longing, not with bitterness, but with a sharp, vivid awareness of the truth. She had been afraid. I had been devoted. And love, in its most honest form, was neither of those things. It was the quiet act of letting go when holding on would only perpetuate pain. I walked back inside, closing the balcony door. The room smelled faintly of paint, of turpentine, of rain that had followed me in through the open window. I placed the envelope on my desk, a reminder that she had tried to reach me, that she had learned something, and that sometimes learning comes too late to mend what is already broken. I picked up a blank canvas and let my brush hover above it. My hand shook slightly, not from hesitation, but from the lingering adrenaline of emotion. Slowly, I dipped it into paint, watching as a single stroke marked the surface, a ribbon of color that felt like the first honest line I had drawn in months. The rain tapped against the glass again, gentle, insistent. It was no longer a reminder of loss or betrayal. It was a companion, a witness, a quiet affirmation that life moves forward even after the most painful lessons. As I painted, I thought of the bracelet, of her fear, of my devotion, of the silent months spent in the echo of her absence. And I realized something profound. Closure isn't a gesture she can grant. It isn't a letter, a confession, or an apology. It is a decision, an active, conscious choice to release what was and to move forward into what can be. I finished the stroke, stepping back to view it. It was imperfect, jagged in places, uneven in its rhythm, but alive, like memory, like grief, like the faint, stubborn pulse of a heart that had survived everything and was ready to live again. The rain outside eased, leaving small puddles that mirrored the clouds above. I pressed my fingers against the wet glass, tracing faint circles in condensation, and imagined her doing the same somewhere. Far away, perhaps thinking of me, perhaps not. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that we had both been taught a lesson that love is not proven through pain, but through honesty, through integrity, and through the courage to let go when holding on would only destroy both hearts involved. I folded the letter and set it beside the blank canvas, alongside the envelope she had sent. They were relics now, artifacts of a story that had ended not with a dramatic confrontation or a reconciliation, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. The kind that leaves scars, yes, but also room for growth. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the aroma sharp and grounding. I sipped slowly, watching the droplets of rain fall in the street below, feeling the tension in my chest ease. For the first time in a long time, I was alone, and not lonely. The solitude felt like breathing, like water after a long drought. Outside, the city moved without pause, indifferent yet alive. I thought of the river, carrying her bracelet away, and I felt the faintest pulse of relief. The final heartbeat of something once beautiful had been released into the current, and it no longer needed me to carry it. I set the cup down and returned to the canvas. Another stroke, another breath, another moment of life claimed back from memory and fear. And in that act, I understood completely. Love is not what binds us to another. Love is what allows us to release, to forgive, sometimes silently, sometimes without ever speaking a word. It is the strength to watch the past disappear into the river, the courage to paint the future even when the heart is raw, and the wisdom to know that endings, no matter how quiet, can be a form of survival. I looked at the letter one last time. No apologies, no regrets. Just truth, distilled into a single, crystalline sentence. She had learned. I had learned. And finally, I could begin to live without her shadow, without the games, without the weight of what I had once mistaken for love. The rain faded to a drizzle. The clouds thinned, letting shafts of sunlight scatter across the studio floor. My brush hovered, poised over the canvas. I smiled faintly. Bitter, yes, but full of a clarity I had never known before. The river had carried the bracelet away, the letter had spoken its truth, and I had finally, truly let go. Outside, a lone crow cawed in the distance. I watched it circle, free in the open sky. Somewhere, far away, she might be watching the same sun, thinking of the same rain. And for the first time, I didn't wish to be a part of her story anymore. I was ready to write my own. It had been years since the rain-streaked afternoons, the hospital beds, the whispered confessions, and the final letter that carried both her truth and my release. Life had moved forward with the quiet insistence of water-shaping stone, imperceptibly, steadily, leaving traces but carving new paths all the same. I had poured myself into my work, into the canvases that now lined gallery walls in cities I had once only dreamed of. Each stroke was deliberate, each color chosen with the knowledge that art could contain what words never could. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with an alert from a news site I rarely visited. A headline caught my eye. Former psychology student confesses to unethical emotional experiment. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was a strange, hollow calm. I clicked the link. There she was, the woman who had haunted my nights and shaped months of my life. Her full name, once familiar, now sounded distant, as if it belonged to a person I had once loved but never truly known. The article detailed her confession: manipulating a partner under false pretenses, conducting a psychological test on devotion, betraying trust under the guise of research. The words were clinical, cold, and yet when I read them, I felt a mixture of things I didn't expect: a shadow of sadness, a flicker of empathy, and a steady sense of closure. People called her cruel. Publicly, professionally, they labeled her actions with words like manipulation, deception, and unethical. I did not because I condoned what she had done, but because I had seen the truth beneath the cruelty. She had been human, flawed, afraid, lonely, desperate to test something intangible, perhaps because she herself did not know how to love without fear. I remembered the hospital hallway, the antiseptic tang in the air, the hum of machines, the subtle tremor in her hands, the way she had whispered that one sentence I would never forget. I wanted to see how much you'd suffer for me. Her fear had driven her to cruelty, and yet it had not erased her humanity. The truth of her actions was now public, codified in a headline and an article, and for the first time, I felt free from the shadows she had cast. I walked to my studio window, letting my gaze drift over the city bathed in the late evening light. The sky held a palette of gold and gray, a mixture of endings and beginnings that mirrored my own journey. I let out a slow breath, the kind that carries years of tension and grief, and felt the weight of the past lift in fragments. It didn't vanish completely, but it no longer controlled me. I thought of the hospital bracelet I had thrown into the river years ago, the letter, the canvases I had painted during my nights of grief. They had all been part of my own reckoning. Markers of suffering, yes, but also of survival, resilience, and eventual mastery over my own narrative. No one could rewrite my story anymore. Not her, not anyone. I had become the author of my own ending. Art had become my sanctuary. Each painting told a fragment of that story, not the one she had imposed upon me, but the one I had chosen to create for myself. I had painted the rain, the hospital corridors, the echoes of her eyes, and the shadow of her hands. I had painted the silence that followed, the letters never sent, the solitary walks beneath soft evening skies. Through each brushstroke, I had reclaimed what was mine: the right to feel, to grieve, to forgive, and most importantly, to move forward. And move forward I had. I remembered the first time I had hung a completed canvas in a gallery years ago. People had gathered, murmuring about color, composition, and emotional resonance. They didn't know the story behind it, nor did they need to. But I did. And in that private knowledge, I felt victory. Not the kind won by revenge, not the kind born of resentment, but a quiet, profound victory over the shadows that had once claimed my heart. The article continued. She had faced professional censure, community scrutiny, and the harsh glare of public opinion. A once bright career in psychology had been tarnished, her reputation fractured like fragile glass. Yet somewhere, buried beneath the shame and regret, I imagined her finally confronting herself, the same way I had confronted her years ago in my studio. I imagined her feeling the weight of her actions and, for the first time, allowing herself to truly weep without performance, without expectation. I did not feel triumph in her downfall. I did not revel in her punishment. I felt something far quieter, far stronger. Peace. The kind of peace that arises when the last thread connecting you to a toxic past is cut, when the hand of fear and manipulation finally slips from your own heart. I leaned against the window pane, tracing a finger through the condensation left by the evening chill. The city lights shimmered like distant stars reflected in water, distant but undeniably present. I thought of all the nights I had spent haunted by her, by the tests, by the uncertainty of whether my devotion was real or merely a performance she was dissecting. Each night had felt like an eternity, a delicate balance of hope and terror. And yet, here I was, years later, unburdened, finally able to breathe freely. The memory of her was no longer a chain, but a shadow passing lightly across my mind. It existed, yes, but it did not define me. I had taken the weight of the past and transformed it, not into anger, not into bitterness, but into art, into understanding, into closure. I walked back to the corner of my studio where a stack of old letters lay, yellowed and curling at the edges. The envelope she had sent, the hospital bracelet I had thrown into the river, all relics of a life once shared, now stored as evidence of growth and survival. I picked up the envelope, tracing the delicate curves of her handwriting with my thumb, and felt a strange tenderness. A memory of love, of devotion, of human fragility. It was not mine to reclaim, but it was mine to acknowledge. The rain outside had stopped, leaving behind puddles that reflected the gold and gray sky. Light flickered through them, fractured and beautiful, and I realized that life had done the same. Fractured me, shaped me, left me with scars, but also with the possibility of beauty born from imperfection. I sat at my desk, picking up a brush and dipping it into fresh paint. The canvas before me was blank, yet alive with potential. Unlike before, I did not aim to depict her, or the pain she had caused, or the betrayal I had endured. This painting would be mine entirely, a testament to survival, to the quiet triumph of choosing oneself over manipulation, over fear, over the past. Each stroke was deliberate, measured, infused with years of reflection. I painted the river, the rain, the soft golden light that broke through clouds. I painted solitude as a sanctuary, grief as a teacher, and closure as the most profound act of love, for oneself. I paused to breathe, watching the paint glisten in the evening light. For a long moment, I allowed myself to simply exist, unburdened, unmeasured, untested. The silence in the studio was comforting, not oppressive. It was my own, finally and wholly. And in that moment, I understood the truest form of justice love could ever offer: to walk away unscarred by the shadows of someone else's fear, to reclaim one's narrative, to write an ending that no one else could edit or rewrite. I had survived her experiment. I had survived her tests. I had survived her fear, and in doing so, I had become whole again. Somewhere, far away, she might be reading the same article I had read. She might feel shame, regret, or even clarity. I did not envy her epiphany, nor did I wish it to undo the life I had rebuilt. I only hoped, silently, that she too could find some fraction of the peace that comes from understanding the consequences of one's actions and the inevitability of truth. I stood and walked to the window once more, gazing out over the city. Lights twinkled like constellations scattered across a darkened sea. The wind carried a faint chill, brushing against my skin like the caress of memory, but it no longer haunted me. I had released the past into the river of life, just as I had once released the hospital bracelet. And now, I let the present wash over me, clear and untainted. The brush hovered over the canvas again, ready for the next stroke. I smiled faintly, a smile that carried years of pain, lessons, and triumph. The studio, my city, my life, all felt luminous with possibility. For the first time, I was not defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I chose to do next. And sometimes that is the only justice love can offer. To survive it, to learn from it, and to walk away, never to be rewritten again. The sun dipped below the horizon, scattering shards of gold across puddles, rooftops, and window panes. I touched the wet paint lightly with my finger, watching it smear into something new, something beautiful. It was no longer a story of pain. It was a story of life reclaimed, of love understood, and of closure. Hard-won, quiet, absolute. I set my brush down. The canvas stood, vibrant and alive, a silent testament to survival, resilience, and freedom. I did not look for her in the streets below. I did not wonder if she would try to reach me again. I knew the answer before it could even form. Life moves forward, for those willing to claim it, and I was ready. Years later, I realized, true closure is not in apologies. It is not in confessions. It is not in recognition from those who hurt us. Closure is in the sovereignty of your own heart, in the reclamation of your own story. I had it now. I was free. The city lights blinked like distant stars. Rain puddles reflected shards of gold and gray. I stood alone in my studio, brush in hand, heart unbound. And for the first time, I felt the full, unshakable weight of peace.